Welcome to I Hate It Here, the podcast for HR and people professionals, making the hardest job in the world just a little bit easier. I'm Hiba Youssef.
Don't be afraid of differences. Again, embrace differences, embrace diversity, embrace conflict even, and know that it is a healthy, productive, just normal part of life. And we need to all get more comfortable dealing with it and navigating it. I think it's a critical skill for HR leaders, for any people within any people anywhere, but within any workforce, to just be better, yes, at these skills.
People are at the core of almost everything we do in HR. Everything we do in HR. And people can be difficult. And I'm not saying that because they have difficult personalities. I'm saying that because no two people you meet are the same. And eventually, the things that make us different can actually create problems if we're not aware of how to exist across differences. What do I mean by that? Well, today's episode will get into that very topic. Joining me today is the brilliant and amazing Jen Laurie. Jen uses they, them, and she, her pronouns. They have 15 years of experience in human resources and are a strategic and visionary leader who is passionate about fostering inclusive, equitable, and thriving workplaces. Jen has worked with nonprofits, foundations, small businesses, and startups in both consulting and in-house roles. She is currently the Chief People Officer at StartOut and founder of Equitable HR Guild, a resource hub for HR professionals on embedding equity and inclusion into HR practices. You can find Jen on LinkedIn talking about DEI, intersectionality, equitable HR practices, and inclusive events. Jen, I'm so pumped to have you on today's podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I can't wait. This has been a while in the making. We've been talking about doing a pod for months now, and I finally been like, can we schedule it finally in my chaos?
It's happening. It's all happening at the right time.
It's here. And you're on what I'm calling one of my favorite seasons of the podcast because we're talking all about relationships, and it's so vast, and our relationship with work and all the things that make us who we are and special. But before we get to the bulk of that today, I'm asking every guest this season, what do you believe is the key to maintaining strong relationships at work?
For me, I think it's I can't say this word, mutuality. So having mutual respect, mutual care, mutual investment in the relationship. And I think this, is colleagues, this is manager and employee, this is even employee and employer. There has to be this mutual investment in the relationship and commitment to the relationship. And I think without that, you're going to have resentment, frustration, exploitation even, and just a breakdown of trust. You have to have both people committed to the relationship, showing up, sometimes not always one-to-one in the exact same ways, but invested, caring about the other person, committed to the relationship. I think that's so crucial and foundational for any positive working relationship or relationship in general. You need that.
I was going to say, I have really only thought about that in terms of friendship and romantic relationships. I've never really thought about that in terms of my work relationships.
I think it's so important. It just, when you don't have that, when there's this imbalance of even just energy and time, again, it can look different. It's going to look different when there's a power dynamic at play, but when there's not both people caring about and investing in the relationship, it just feels off. It feels icky. I think we're all really familiar with it in our personal relationships, but it happens at work as well.
For sure. That one friend who only texts you and they want you to listen to them complain about their problems.
Right. Yeah. And it's one-sided in the text chain where it's all just for them. And you're yep.
My one-sided text chains are just because I don't know how to send one text. I have to send 50.
I am also, yeah.
I'm a 50 texter. Here's random thoughts I had throughout the day. It's really funny. But for today, okay, we're going to talk a little bit about that mutual respect thing today in a different, but same, but different way. This concept of existing across differences. You and I were talking about it. We have had an interesting few weeks on social media. The world is the world. And you and I have been sharing a lot of thoughts about the things that make us all different is unique and beautiful, but also can be really challenging for others, especially if you and I have witnessed the commentary on social media, which is questionable at best. But tell me about what existing across differences means to you.
Yeah, to me, I think it's just being able to exist and communicate with anyone. And I think that's just a lost skill right now. I think, not just appreciating people's differences, but realizing that they bring a lot of value to a relationship, that they bring, that diversity is really like enriching of our lives and our relationships and our workplaces. And so I think to me, it means just recognizing those differences and being able to actively engage with those differences and yeah, be in relationships with folks that, aren't all the same as us. So that's like the beauty of the world that we live in. Right. But I just think it's something that we're not very good at right now. And there's a lot of need for skill building around this.
Yeah, especially at one in the world, but specifically at work, a lot of the conflict I see is when two people are just different. And I wrote this whole newsletter about working styles, where I was like, sometimes you have your analytical people versus your creative people versus your collaborative people. And someone at Work Week read it and actually sent it back to me and was like, oh my God, this is so helpful. I understand why I've been struggling with this person. It's because they have a completely different working style than me. And I was like, yeah, probably because we're all different and you have to learn that work with each other. But I think it's just really interesting because we're all so different. But I think the topic here that really is making my brain fire off is how you usually surround yourself with people that are similar to you. So a lot of your friends are probably similar to you. So then when you show up at work and you don't get to necessarily pick all the people you work with, it's you're bound to run into somebody who works differently than you.
And I think we just don't equip people to do that. I see so many people that are shocked by coming across people that are different than them, or confused that, oh, you think about this differently than I do, or you might approach this project differently than I do. And yeah, that's just that's the nature of the world, right? But we don't put ourselves in those circumstances as often as I think we should. And so it can be really jarring when people just aren't ready for that type of relationship.
Yeah, I've used this analogy before, like a canyon. When you're not saying we've ever been there, but let's say we're in an adventure novel or a fantasy novel, and you get to that point in the movie where the person has to jump the canyon to the other side, right? Or jump over a canyon. I don't know if I'm using the word canyon correctly, by the way, but you're jumping to the other side. Okay.
Right.
When I tell people, when you meet people who are similar to you, that gap that you're jumping over is tiny. It's you're taking a step. It feels natural. You're going to understand that person right away. When the person across the table is so different than you, it feels like you're jumping this massive gap. And it can be really hard for you mentally to actually make that jump to even get to where the person is, or even halfway or closer to them. And I think about that analogy quite a bit at work, where I'm just there's someone over here and there's someone over there, and this difference is so wide. Now we have to find a way to get them to come closer to the middle, or at least meet each other somewhere. When we were talking about what to talk about on this episode, why did this topic come up? Why do you think this has become so important?
Yeah, again, I think it's just a really lost skill right now. And the obvious thing is we're very divided as a society, I think, in the US, and I don't just mean politically, I think ideologically, in terms of lifestyle, and just, I don't know, everyday opinions feel really divisive right now. So I think that's a big part of it. But I also think a lot of folks are just showing up more and more open about their differences, which is a great thing, right? People are showing up more with their identities and their perspectives and their opinions. And I think for so long, the norm was that people would kind of mask and hide and code switch and conform. And people are just sick of that. They don't want to do it anymore. So I think people are bringing more of themselves into relationships and into workplaces. And that just is going to cause more conflict, not necessarily bad conflict, but just differences of opinion, differences again of identity. And so I don't think we're really ready for that. A lot of people I just don't think are used to that. That feels new, that feels scary. And so it's about kind of figuring out how do we navigate this new world where we have a little bit more difference out on the table and out in the open. But again, that's not a bad thing. It's just how do we navigate that and equip people to navigate that in our workplaces?
Definitely. I feel as a kid, I remember this is so sad. I remember being really ashamed of being different. As a kid, celebrating different holidays, speaking a different language, having different hair. I just remember feeling so ashamed of being different. And it took a lot of unlearning as I got older and more mature and did more self-exploration and really committed to the path of loving what makes me different, where once I removed that aspect of shame, I actually think it helped me be more empathetic to others that are also different than me. And I think that like if I had not done that work on myself, I don't know if I would have honestly like gotten here. And I think like a lot of people, I'm not saying are afraid to do the work, but potentially have always been surrounded by the same thing, that when it comes to doing the work, it feels so foreign to them that they're just like, I don't have capacity to do this.
Right, right. Yeah. I think that's exactly it. It feels really unfamiliar. It feels uncomfortable. And people, I think, often are just like conflict averse too. And so it's like, I don't want to engage. I just kind of want to stay back. And sometimes I think that also means people go back to that masking and hiding and conforming that, again, I think we've worked so hard to like fight against that. But once you start to get into a relationship or put more of yourself out there, it can be hard to like show up and be, yeah, successful in engaging that way.
Yeah. What role do you think we play as HR? Like how does HR help employees and leaders actually exist across differences?
I think it's like investing in learning and continuous learning. And I think there's really like hard skills around this. Like, and we need to be investing as organizations in equipping our people with these skills. So, conflict training, just like general communication skills, emotional intelligence, like training is huge. Active listening, empathy, like all of that is so, so critical. I think even things like inclusive language, like those are all very like those are skills that you can build, right? You might not be great at it and super comfortable with it, but you can invest in learning and continuing to improve in them. And so I think, yeah, just making more of an investment in that type of continuous learning, making sure that it's a priority for your organization to upskill folks in these areas is, I think, really, really critical and foundational.
Yeah, I was thinking, I think I wrote about conflict a few weeks ago, and I read the stat that like less than 1% of HR people have actually gotten trained on how to handle conflict. And I was like, oh God, that tracks. Cause like I only learned conflict because this is a weird story, but I'm going to tell it because I feel like more
Mm-hmm.
people should know about this. When I was in middle school, they were like, we're going to do this optional conflict resolution training. It's a 1-day course on a Saturday for 8 hours, and you get trained in how to be like a mediator. And I
Mm-hmm.
think I was like in 8th grade. Someone needs to verify. Like, if you had the same experience of like, no, maybe I was like in 6th grade. If you had the same middle school experience, like, please write me in because I need to know if this was just a weird thing my elementary school did or middle school did. But then I got trained for a whole day. They like gave me a binder. Like, I was there learning
Mm-hmm.
how to navigate conflict as a teenager. And then I ended up in college being an RA. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
you got your housing paid for. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to be an RA. Like,
Right.
God, not cheap. So, and I was like, oh, well, I have like mediator training. And it actually came in handy so many times because I had to
Mm-hmm.
mediate conflict between roommates who had just been randomly paired. Like, that was when you have women two crying, screaming women
Right.
yelling at each other, and you're in the middle trying to mediate it as their RA. It really teaches you a lot. But
Yep.
I mean, like, I laugh, but like, I still use the stuff I learned when I was like 12 to mediate
Mm-hmm.
conflict now in the workplace. And like, less than 1% of people getting training on conflict is mind boggling to me. So I love that you're suggesting that we train on these. What if someone like doesn't have the resources to go out and get someone externally to train on them? Like, what solution do you have for someone who's like, oh God, I need to teach everyone about this, but I don't have any resources to make it happen?
I mean, I think there's a lot of great free resources out there on, again, like emotional intelligence and just kind of general communication and conflict. I think there's a lot of different ways you could do it depending on your sort of team structure and what works well for them. But I mean, even like I have a friend who was recently kind of trying to train herself up on conflict and use ChatGPT and just like kind of engage back and
Love
forth with
it.
like, what are the like basic skills I need to know to mediate a conflict? And like, what if this happens? What if that happens? It just kind of workshopped for a while. So I think there's ways to do it. And again, there's a lot of great resources out there. So just figuring
Yeah.
out like, what's the top priority? What does my team really need to focus on? And how can I kind of like, cobble some things together to put together some sort of learning around it.
I love the Chat GPT. So if you're not using Chat GPT, it is really fun to like argue with it. I know I'm
Mm-hmm.
training it. Multiple people when Chat GPT first came out, I told a bunch of people, they were like, "Do you use it?" And I was like, "No, I just find myself arguing with it." And
Yes.
everyone was like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, I just like ask it a question and then I don't like the answers, then I keep arguing with it." And all my coworkers were like, why are you doing that? And I was like, because I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to get to like a better answer. And they're like, oh, so you're
Mm-hmm.
training it. And I'm like, yeah,
Right.
eventually. But I do think it's a great place to start when you're like, if I need to build a training on conflict resolution, what are the
Mm-hmm.
three modules that should be in it and write me an exercise employees can do to practice, it
Right.
literally will spit something out that's like pretty relevant, honestly,
And
which
so
is
much of
just
it too is just normalizing the conversation again, like getting people to think
yeah.
about the fact that maybe I'm not that good at this and I need to like think more about it. A lot of emotional intelligence training is more about like the internal work and like the follow-up
Yeah.
that people do anyways. So it's really just like, okay, we're going to spend some time, we're going to show that we're organizationally committed to this, and we want you to be upskilling yourselves as well.
Yeah, the thing about conflict that I think is so cool, I mention this a lot, is like how you handle conflict as an adult really depends on how you observed conflict growing up. So
Yeah.
like if we're in a household where they resolved conflict in a healthy way and you saw conflict as a means to like express yourself and reach a different resolution, then potentially you're better equipped as an adult to handle it. And I always say like I love conflict because I'm like, oh, we're just like it's an exchange of ideas. And people
Right.
are like, no, it's like it's emotional and you're fighting. And I'm like, no, you're literally just sharing ideas. You're just
Right.
your thoughts are different potentially. Like that's all conflict is. And people are always like baffled by me, but I'm like, I love it. It's
Right.
so fun.
It's so funny because I actually grew up with like a very conflict diverse family, and so they were not having any type of conflict, not healthy or unhealthy, just like zero conflict existing. Period.
No conflict.
and I actually sought out mediator training. I went through like a whole program in like my early 20s because I felt like
In your middle
I'm
school?
not
Just kidding.
not in middle school. I've never heard of that, and I am curious if anyone else has done that, but that's fascinating. But yeah, I was like, I think this would be a helpful skill for me to have. I was thinking about going into like social work at the time, and so I thought like, okay, this is helpful. And I learned so much. I mean, yeah, I just had never thought about conflict in that way, and now I use it just like you all the time. But yeah, I think I absolutely agree. It's like the context that you have and like those early learnings about what conflict means and like what the purpose is of conflict is so huge. Yeah.
It's so fun. You touched on something really interesting, like that I always think of when it comes to conflict, like the power imbalances that intersect with employee differences when resolving conflicts are like so intense sometimes. Like, how can we as HR like actually address the power imbalances that tend to manifest with like or intersect with like employee differences?
I think honestly, a big part of it is again that awareness. Like I think a lot of leaders and managers don't even acknowledge that power imbalances exist in the workplace. I've had so many times where I'm talking to like a leader and they're, talking about interaction they have with an employee, and I bring up something like very basic, like, well, yeah, maybe, the imbalance of power is kind of like affecting the way they're showing up. And they're always like, what a brand new idea. So I think that is like so foundational just to get people acknowledging it. Like I think even when a leader or a manager can acknowledge that, yes, I'm in a position of power, that can go a really long way to make people feel like, okay, we understand that there's this differential, and we're not going to change that. Like that's just the nature of certain workplace dynamics. But yeah, we just acknowledge it, and then we can navigate around it. We can talk about it. I think that's really big.
I think the interesting part about power is like, we just like people just don't understand when they have it or don't have it, and that's like a very kind of privileged thing. But like,
Right.
I'm so fascinated by power. I took a political theory class. We were required to take it for my major in college. I was a government and Middle Eastern studies major, so you should just see how I ended up in HR studying governments. But we took a political theory class, and we had to do a lot of reading around like power. And we read this philosopher Foucault and the concept of power and like who has it. So my entire life I've kind of been like obsessed with it. And so I think like I can almost spot it so quickly in the workplace. But I've been helping a lot of leaders understand like when you're in a leadership role or you're even at like a higher position, potentially the other person who could also be very different from you is now also navigating their differences with you with that complex of they have power over me.
Right.
So it's just important to like always address it and call it out. And like people are so befuddled by it, like what you said, like they're like, what power do I have?
Right.
And you're like, all the power.
I love when leaders try and be like, I don't choose to have any power. Like I didn't assign myself this power. It's like that may be true. And also you do, innately you do. Like that's a fact. I also think there is a lot of protection you can do, like just kind of showing up for the people who might not have as much power. So as HR, I think like, just kind of calling it out again, making sure that you're really clear and explicitly state kind of what types of protections there are against retaliation or other like harassment, checking in on people throughout the process. If there's like a very, fixed conflict that people are going through, making sure that they know that throughout and even after, and sometimes even bringing in like a third party or, someone to kind of offset that a little bit. So I think there's some things you can do to like adjust and kind of like accommodate that power dynamic as well. But honestly, yeah, like 90% of it is just getting people comfortable acknowledging it and talking about it and navigating it.
Love that. It makes me think about the role we play is in HR of navigating that power, but then also supporting the employees too on the employee side.
Mm-hmm.
How would you support employees who might feel marginalized or even isolated due to their differences in like a predominantly homogeneous workplace?
Yeah, that's huge because I think the environment is so much a part of like how we deal with conflict. And if you have this environment that just doesn't feel safe, that doesn't feel like inclusive, it's just so much harder to deal with conflict in a healthy way, or even just deal with difference, even if it's not coming to like a conflict. So I would say, just really investing in creating opportunities for people to kind of like share their concerns in as safe as a way as possible. Again, having like a third party that people can talk to, having different resources for folks that they can go to, whether it's like anonymous feedback channels or like HR office hours or kind of like one-on-one check-ins with folks, like creating that space that's a little bit removed from the larger group that people can show up in and engage and feel maybe just like a little bit safer. But I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. The anonymous reporting to me it's a suggestion I give very often, because if you are in a mostly homogeneous workplace and there are a few people who like do not belong to the majority group, they're probably afraid. Honestly, they don't feel safe sharing their feedback. And you have to think about like, how do I create a mechanism where they feel safe and protected sharing it? That doesn't necessarily mean they can come to me, because also like a lot of people have that HR is not your friend. HR will retaliate against you. They've seen that experience. A lot of people from marginalized groups also have experienced that personally. And so I think just if you have a mostly homogeneous workplace and you're really thinking like, how do I create a space where everyone feels safe? I think an anonymous reporting vehicle is super helpful for just people to share their concerns in a way that doesn't instantly out who they are.
Right. I think too, like if it's really feels unsafe for individuals to even sometimes they won't use anonymous channels, like
Yeah.
putting in place as many opportunities for like peer support or kind of mentorship with people who might have more similar identities to them. I think that can be really helpful. I've also seen some folks recently doing like ERGs between multiple organizations. So like a couple of organizations with like a similar focus and they all come together for like a shared ERG. So it's like external to the organization, but still there's probably a couple people from your organization a part of it. And I think that's brilliant. Like I love creating that space that again is like a little bit of a safe corner, still related to your workplace, but that feels like, just you're more comfortable. There's more people like you. It just feels a little bit more of a safe place that you can talk about your needs and what's going on in the workplace.
Oh, I love that. I think like external support, people always think like I have to fix everything internally. And I'm always like, hey, there's this world outside where you can also give resources to all these people. So like there's that too. I love that tip of like getting the ERGs, external ERGs to work together. That's like really cool. I'm taking that one back with me. I have a question for you around bridging the gap. So we have these differences. They're everywhere. Like you're different. Like we're different from each other. But like, how do you actually encourage open dialogue within an organization when these differences can maybe lead to like discomfort, even conflict, like what we were touching on earlier? Like, is there a way to actually encourage that open dialogue in an organization?
I think, yeah, it goes back to the environment and like building a culture of trust and psychological safety. I think that is just non-negotiable if you want to have these types of conversations. People are not going to show up and engage and share their differing opinions or their dissent if they don't feel just comfortable and safe in the environment, period. So I think, promoting transparency, accountability, and honesty at all levels of the organization, like really working with your leadership team to set that culture, addressing any issues that are kind of like flying in the face of that culture of trust and safety, and making sure that you have, again, like an environment that people feel like they can just show up and talk in general is so foundational to it.
Yeah, I think like people always get scared about hard conversations. And so I always am just like, there doesn't need to be any, like, if we're coming to the conversation with positive intent, which I hate that phrase. I say that caveat, I hate that phrase a lot because I think it's weaponized for evil. But like, if you can create a culture in your organization where people know they can have conversations that might be uncomfortable, but will actually, both people are coming at it from a good spot, I think that could be life-changing too. But that's like so not what we see in the real world.
Right.
And so I think like, I say this a lot, like a lot of times the working world mirrors the real world. And in the real world, we've seen people radically different views. It ends up getting really uncomfortable and turns like hateful. And people can't actually have a conversation about why it is they view what they view. So I think if you can do that internally, God bless you, and please teach us all how to do it. Because I think it's one of the hardest things to really be able to master. And I think it's just tough. Like, do you have any examples of how you've been able to bridge that gap between employees who may have like just fundamentally different worldviews?
It's hard. I think so much of it comes down to empathy and people just being willing to like understand that people are different than them and be willing to listen to them and not see it as like, see each other as people instead of seeing each other as the issue that's between them. And I think that takes a lot of time. That takes like a lot of work typically on the other folks that are involved to kind of like nurture that environment of just communication, of active listening, of empathy. But I think it's about like building up the relationship that surrounds the issue and surrounds the conflict so that people aren't just like at each other's throats over, I believe this and I believe this, and we just can't come together. It's like, okay, maybe let's put that to the side for a second and just try and just communicate with each other, just like build the relationship, build some of that mutual respect. And then we can kind of like address the issue if we even need to at that point. Like sometimes it's like, we don't even need to like talk about these different worldviews. Like we just need to get along, respect each other, be able to communicate, in a positive
Especially
way.
At work.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
I talked about this with Jess Winder on the podcast a few weeks ago about like how strong of beliefs I have. Like I don't do anything like medium. Like I am 0 or I am 100. There's like no 50 for me. I spent my entire life trying to figure out how to get to like the middle. I'm just this way. And I think but the thing about me is like, I'm very comfortable looking somebody in the eye who has very different views than me and saying like, hey, those are your views. They're not my views. If I can respect that you have your views, you can also respect that I have my views.
Right.
But so many people try to jump to I'm right and you're wrong.
Yes.
And I get it because like I have that in my mind too where I see like an opposing view and I'm like, oh my God, they're so wrong. But I think when you're at work and you're trying to like really build a place that is inclusive and has a sense of belonging, there's something beautiful about all of us thinking and believing different things. Where I think it gets bad is when you start to weaponize your beliefs and say like, well, this is right and this is wrong.
Right.
But it's hard because I see a lot of things happening in the world where I'm like, that's so wrong. I want to say that's so wrong and I don't believe that. But I think like I turn around and I'm like, I just need you to do your task. I just need you to do your project task at work. Like,
often am like, let's just set that to the side for now and let's focus on the project we're working on or like the person we're trying to onboard. Yes. Yeah. Right. Like whatever we're doing, let's just focus on that. Maybe we'll come back to that later. Probably not, but
probably not. But then I'm going to go do my good in the world of like volunteering and supporting the orgs and helping my friends and doing all the things there. At work, I just need you to do your task. I can't care about, Also, the other thing that I think is interesting is I see some people arguing on the internet and I'm like, they try to convince the other person to like come to their point of view. And I'm just like, that never works.
No, especially not on the internet. Like this is not like a friend to friend, like heart to heart conversation. Right. Like this is not happening.
Like, why are you doing that? But I think about that a lot at work because like that is a work tactic too, where someone is like, you're so different than me. Why don't you do it my way? I get so mad when leaders are like, my employee doesn't do work the way I would do it.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, they're not you.
Right.
Like,
right. And that's fine. Right.
Exactly. Why would they? Why don't you let them do work the way they want to do it?
Right.
I think that's just like lost on us. And like back to like what you said at the very beginning, like we need to teach people how to exist when they do things differently. I just think it's a lost skill. We're like creatures of habit who got used to ourselves and nobody else. So there's that. I mean, bridging the gap is always going to be, I think, potentially hard depending on how far that gap is. Remember, like if somebody comes at you with completely opposing views, it's going to be really tough. I would love to talk about like common obstacles you've faced, like your work around like equitable HR and building a place where people can exist comfortably across differences. Like, what are some obstacles you've encountered when trying to work to ensure that all employees can actually exist comfortably across differences? Yeah, I'll leave the question there.
Yeah.
Common obstacles.
I mean, so much of it, like it's just everything we just talked about is like ego, right? It's like resistance to change, defensiveness, just an unwillingness to admit, not even that I might be wrong, but like admit that someone else's view exists, like that they have their own truth that they can believe. And people just don't want to do that so often. And I think it like boils down to that so often. And it's really hard to deal with other people's egos. It's like an art form in and of itself. And it takes a lot of time and patience and brutal honesty to really get people to like put down their ego for a second, again, focus on the other person or the task at hand. So I think that is huge. Like that is the biggest number one obstacle that I see, in any type of difference, conflict, anything.
Dude, ego is fascinating to me. It's come up so many times this season on the podcast.
Oh, I'm sure.
Where I'll say, what are the key to like good relationships? It comes up in every episode. Someone brings up ego, and I'm just like, what are we all doing? What is going on with us as humans? That this concept of ego has come up so often, where people can't seem to put aside their differences. And a part of it is mostly drawn from like our self-inflated view of ourselves. Like that, like, I'm right. What's that? Oh, was that from Matilda? Sorry. Pop culture reference on my brain works. That Matilda reference where he's like, I'm right, I'm big, you're small, I'm right, you're wrong. What is that scene from where he's like, I think he's like yelling at her. I don't know if it's Matilda, by the way.
I think it might be, or it's one of those like 90s.
Whenever someone's ego like pops off, or I see it in a conversation, or like I'm trying to coach someone and it's an ego thing, that's the first thing that comes into my head. He's like, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm big, you're small. I'm like, oh, why does my brain work this way? But it's like what I feel. It's so relevant.
It's just so silly. It's like, again, just why can't you just like put it to the side for a second? You can still have your ego, even like, I'm never going to convince you that you're not amazing and great and like right about everything, but just like, you don't need to center it in every relationship that you have. Like you need to just like let your ego just take a back seat for a minute and center the other person, center the work that we're trying to do. And just, again, admit that someone else's view exists and that they can have that view and it's not going to harm you or threaten you in any way.
Well, I think it's hard because I think inherently we're all just very selfish.
Yeah. It's like ego and just self-centeredness. It's like, I want it my way. This is easier if I just do it on my own in my way and everyone else just falls in line. Yeah.
But it's so... Oh God, it's so terrible for inclusion and belonging because like who gets the right to behave that way?
Right.
Often it's not people who are women or people from underrepresented groups.
Right.
And I wish more people talked about them.
Yeah, everyone's just trying to conform to this one person with a lot of privileges, ideas and opinions and views and exactly.
Which makes me sad because like we all talk about like the power of diversity, and this episode is all about existing across differences and like the more differences you have in a room, the better the room is equipped to handle and deal with a challenge.
Right. And there's so much power in that, like in bringing out, again, letting people express their views, even if you make the decision like that, I'm actually going to do it my way. Like just hearing these different opinions, hearing these different perspectives, even like experiences. Lived experience, I think, is huge too. And it makes us all, like way better off in the end if we can at least like work through those differences and express them and go back and forth and have a dialogue. And it makes your opinion, like stronger if you end up still going that way. And people just don't want to do that work.
Yeah, but the people be peopling.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They make this job so fun, so complicated. Okay, now on to some of my favorite stuff. I love ending most episodes with a little bit of advice and a little bit of future. So, what advice would you give to HR people who are just starting to navigate the complexity of existing across differences in their own careers?
I would say if you can invest in it, invest in some sort of like conflict mediation training. I think, yes, we've said it multiple times throughout this conversation that there are just amazing skills that you will come back to time and time again. I think it is so valuable. And I think the other thing is just like being open to the fact that this is an ongoing process, that like you will continue to learn how to engage with different people. And so much of it is just humility and openness and willingness to learn and willingness to change and a lot of like self-work. So just kind of embrace that at the onset and know that it will be a process throughout probably your entire career and life to learn how to exist with people who are different than you. And that's okay. And that's good. So just be ready for it.
Something that I think is fascinating is like I read a stat that like 70% of HR is women. And I wish there was a deeper stat to better understand what percentage was like white women versus underrepresented groups. But I bring this up now because like the industry as a whole leans more towards being women. And that means maybe we're not that different as an industry as well.
Right. I think that is absolutely true. Yep.
And we could probably learn something about existing across differences. Like it would make us better HR people. Like I do think, I'll be honest, like I think I'm a better HR person, not better than anyone, but like better than my version of HR, my own version, because I have a different perspective and a different lived experience than potentially like the average person. Or maybe now the average person actually, because Gen Z is the most diverse generation that's ever existed. Like we're getting more and more diverse, which is so great. But I think it makes me, I felt so different for so long in my life. And I think it makes me a bit more empathetic to those who might also be different. It doesn't make me perfect. I still have a lot to learn about how to be a better ally to people, how to build better support systems for those who are neurodiverse in the workplace. Like that's work I'm constantly doing on myself. But I do think if you're listening to this and you haven't really experienced people who are truly different than you, it might mean it's time to do some work to like hear those perspectives and experiences, because it's going to come back and better serve you as an HR person to build a better environment for your people.
Right. Exactly. And I think too, the bigger thing is like, it's so cheesy to say. I'm trying to think of like a way to not say it in the most cheesy way possible, but like differences and diversity is incredibly valuable. Like it is what we need, right? Like we have to be better at this. We have to understand how to work with people who are different than us. It's going to build better outcomes, better teams, like more positive cultures and relationships. And it's like, it's non-negotiable at this point, right? That we're moving towards more and more diverse spaces. And so, I think just embracing it and realizing that like, it is so, so valuable. We have to get good at navigating it. We can't just like shy away from things that are uncomfortable or the conflict or anything that may come up, with it. We have to be able to exist in these spaces.
Yeah. And that leads me perfectly to my future question. Like I have two future questions. How do you see the concept of existing across differences evolving in the future of work, especially as our workplaces become more global and more diverse?
Yeah. I mean, I think it is just, again, a foundational skill that everyone needs. Like it is something that we have to make just like a bare minimum skill, that we know how to exist across differences. We know how to embrace conflict. We know how to engage in diverse like groups and manage diverse groups. And I think, it's something we need to like know is a priority and be able to bring into any workplace, because it's just necessary. Again, it's like, it is just the way that the world is and what we want for our future world. And so we have to get better at it.
I will plus one to that and then add, well, I guess my plus one isn't add. I never know how to use that phrase.
Sure.
I will add like supporting like more global and diverse cultures and companies, because I think the thing like as we're like doing HR work, if we're building an experience that is only serving one type of person, we're really making a statement that if you are different, you don't belong here.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
I come back to things like happy hours after work. Well, some people don't drink.
Right.
Some people
Right.
have childcare that they need
Right.
to take care of. Some people might be running off to a second job or be crafting a skill that they do after work. And
Mm-hmm.
so by doing this thing happy hour, like you're potentially telling people like only certain people can come to, we only want certain people at this event.
Right. Right.
And so I even think about that as like, as we're thinking about existing across differences, like think about what it is you're building, and what you're building, does it apply to people across different groups?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like I know the one size fits all approach like really doesn't create an equitable environment. Like you need to be thinking about how can we shape our policies and our programs to really maximize and create space for everyone to benefit from them.
Right, right. And so much of that too is just including, like diverse perspectives in the creation of policies and programs,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that you're thinking about accessibility when you're designing, an after hours like event, thinking about who's going to be able to come to that, like just really centering the importance and imperative of including a diverse group of people into anything that we're doing. And that's hard. It takes like a little bit more time. It takes some intention and some labor to like do that back and forth with people, but it is absolutely necessary to creating the type of environment that we need and we want in our modern workplaces.
Yeah, this is perfect, because my last question is, what initiatives do you believe will be crucial in helping organizations better exist across differences in coming years? I have a hot take answer on this one.
I have a couple, but I would say like we've already talked about a lot about continuous learning and development and like relationship skills. I think the other big one is just investing in DEI and like just prioritizing DEI initiatives. So much of I think what's lacking as well is just like people understanding what we mean by differences, like what we mean by different identities and what people's needs are, what people's perspectives are, what people's lived experiences are. And so the more that we can, just like normalize that and prioritize that within our organizations, I think the better off we'll be.
Yeah, mine was going to be the hot take hill I'll never die on is like revamp your performance management process.
Yes. Yes.
I hate to, I don't want to say the phrase beat a dead horse, because that's just sad. Like the horse is dead, just leave it alone. I don't want to like kill this idea more. I don't know. Right. I'm terrible with phrases, but like performance, oh God, I'm going to start a rant. I'm trying to stop myself because that's not what this episode is about. I have self-control. I promise I do. Okay. Performance. What is high performance does not mean the same thing to every single person. How you enable someone to be successful is not the same for every single person. And how we do work looks different depending on the person. So if you're really thinking, how can we create an organization where people can exist better across their differences? I really think looking at your performance management process and looking at who you're rewarding for high performance and who else might be out there that's doing a great job, but maybe doing it differently could be super powerful. And I'm going to do an episode on neurodiversity in next season, I think, because I think it's a topic that I need to better understand. HR leaders need to better understand, because it's going to it should shape a lot of our thinking around things like performance, around things like creating an environment where people can exist and be different. Like there's so much to be said about it. Where like even existing across differences from like a manager direct report relationship, I could explore that one forever. But like performance management is my hill I will die on. Look at it, make sure it's fair, make sure it's equitable. Jen, I feel like you have some resources around this.
I don't know if I have anything specific to performance management, but I love it. I mean, yes, 100%. I think performance management to me is like one of the best litmus tests for the values of an organization, and seeing again, what do you reward? What do you care about? What are you promoting within your organization? So I love it. Yes. 100 plus 100.
Hell yeah. Okay. So that was really kind of the bulk of our episode that I wanted to talk to you about differences. If you were just to leave the listeners with one last note or a thought, what would it be?
I think don't be afraid of differences. Again, embrace differences, embrace diversity, embrace conflict even, and know that it is a healthy, productive, just normal part of life. And we need to all get more comfortable dealing with it and navigating it. I think it's a critical skill for HR leaders, for any people anywhere, but within any workforce, to just be better. Yes. At these skills.
I love it. And maybe if we're better at it at work, we'll go out and take it out into the world and be better about it in the world. And maybe, optimistically speaking, we'll see like less hate in the world.
Just a little bit more peace. Yes.
I'm just dreaming. I love, like in Miss Congeniality, we're like, where's the one thing that you want? And they're like, world peace. I'm like, yeah, actually, why did I think that was funny? No, that's like literally
that's all I want. Yes, please.
Now watching it as an adult, I'm like, wait, actually though, all of them are making really good points. Like, yes, we just want world peace. But I'm just saying, like, if we can learn, all of us collectively as humans can learn to exist across our differences, like, I think the work will get better, our relationships will get stronger, our output probably better for those who are focused on output. But and then maybe like the world becomes a better place, honestly, where like we feel safe in all spaces.
Yeah.
Despite being different. I don't know. That's my optimism.
That's the dream. That's the dream. I'm on board. Yep.
I just want a better world for all of us. Okay, that's the end of today's episode. I will stop being such a dork today. Jen, for people who want to get in touch with you, how can they find you?
I am on the world of LinkedIn. That is the best place to find me. I'm there most days, and reach out to me there.
LinkedIn, the professional MySpace we all grew up into. I really wish LinkedIn would bring a top 8 back, because I would totally be playing with people with that one.
I feel like that could cause some real conflict.
I would
in
play with my CEO so hard. I would literally like move him from like 3 to 5 to 8 just to like see if he would notice. Okay,
just after your one-on-one, move him. Yeah.
He'd be so mad at me, but actually that'd be really funny to fuck with him and do it.
I love it.
All right, you heard it here first. LinkedIn top 8 coming your way soon. Jen, you would definitely make it into my top 8. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure.
I can't wait to see you in real life next week.
I know.
Sorry for those that are listening. I get to see Jen in real life. Okay, I should end the episode. Oh, here's the thing I'm working on this season. I've been so chaotic about it, which I'm sure the team loves. But if you like this podcast, you can, subscribe, like it, review it, love it, post about it, send it to your toxic boss, whatever you want. Let me know. And thank you so much for listening. And thanks for being here, Jen.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. Keep up with all the latest HR resources by subscribing on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen. And if you love I Hate It Here, tell an HR friend. I'll see you next time.